Okie doke, folks. So we're going to go ahead and start the second part of Chapter 6 on insect behavior. And yep, this is all about how bugs wind up liking each other very much and having little tiny bugs for the next generation. So hopefully this doesn't make too many people blush, but we'll go over some trippy stuff in terms of finding mates and then copulation as well. One of the things I wanted to kind of frame this whole presentation around is actually an observation of many different types of animals in their mating behavior. So this applies to insects just as it applies to spiders and fish and amphibians and reptiles and birds and mammals and including humans in some cases. And so you may find this sort of an interesting pattern, and it will also explain the growth of antlers and calls and sounds and other things going on here. So basically with males, a lot of energy is spent in the locating and attracting of mates. In terms of cells, generally sperm is produced, but that's about it, going toward the offspring. Males tend to be persistent and are basically in search of any receptive female that's willing to breed. Now, females, on the other hand, because they have a larger, generally a larger energetic and material investment in the offspring, they produce fewer gametes, and most of the nutrients and building materials going into producing offspring are made by the female. Therefore, they are far more selective in their mate selection. They want to make sure that their offspring have the best chance at survival. Now, there are a couple of conditions that have to be met that are absolutely required in terms of actually copulation and producing offspring. First of all, you have to have both sexes active at the same time and in the same location. There are many migratory species of animals where males and females may be in different places at different times and could be thousands of miles apart. And so you have to make sure that they're in the same place, obviously, and they have to be able to locate the opposite sex so that they can, mix up the old DNA and have cute little kids and all that good stuff. And obviously, in terms of producing viable offspring, they have to have the correct pieces and parts to make sure that that works. Now, there's actually a number of ways that one individual animal may be able to find the opposite sex, and so a lot of senses are involved. You could have vision, of course, hearing, sound, listening to sounds and calls and chirps and twerps and all that good stuff. Smell as well. And actually, if you're looking at this moth down here, this is a male moth that has some crazy antennae on there, and those are largely chemoreceptors, and so they were trying to pick up the pheromones of females. And one thing you'll notice on moths of this species, and a lot of similar ones, is that the female moths do not have big fluffy antennae. And because it's the males who are putting in that effort to find them rather than the other way around. So one of the crazy examples that's actually presented in the book is with mayflies, and the males have these huge swarms, and they're all just flying around trying to attract mates and all that good stuff, and it's just like this crazy massive males. And the female mayflies are actually known to fly just bolt right through that swarm, and by the time they come flying out the other end of that swarm, they will have mated. And so that is just obviously guaranteeing that the next generation of mayflies is going to get made. Another pretty cool example in the book of attracting mates and finding mates is the fireflies or lightning beetles that have a symbiotic relationship with some bacteria in their abdomen, and they're able to produce pulses of light and different shades of light depending on the species. So it's kind of like Morse code in some ways, and you know, what's also kind of neat about this is that different species of fireflies, again, these aren't true flies, these are beetles, different species of these beetles wind up having their own flicker pattern, their own flashing patterns, and different elevations at which they fly to ensure that they don't mate with the wrong species. So it's species specific, and maybe some of you have seen fireflies if you've traveled outside of this area. They're pretty cool, little wispy flashes of light going through the air at night. With regard to pheromones, this is pretty amazing stuff. These chemicals are in very, very small concentrations, but they're very powerful chemicals, and the males can pick them up from far away. They are sex attractant pheromones, so they're chemicals that are sent out as a beacon or a signal to males. The benefit of this is that the females don't have to expend any energy in finding a male. Okay, she just emits the pheromones. He might be several miles away, and his receptors will pick up on those pheromones. In the last chapter, as we were, or not the last chapter, but the last section of the book, when we were talking about direction being determined by equal concentrations of stimulus on the left side and the right side, you can see that those antennae that he's got are going to help him direct and find her. So he's going to burn all the calories, you know, flapping his wings, you know, 2.5 miles to find her, and she will be there. In addition to pheromones, another way to attract and locate mates is by using sound. You're probably familiar with these, and what we've got with these insects, orthopteras, the crickets and grasshoppers, and hemiptera are bugs, like technically bugs, and diptera or diptera are the true flies that have only 2 wings. And so within those 3 orders of insects, you know, there are flies that produce sound with their wing vibrations and attract mates. Crickets and grasshoppers and such will produce sound by rubbing some parts of their wings together. And yes, that's the crickets chirping and all that good stuff. Now, with cicadas specifically, they've got a pretty noisy noise organ on their metathorax. So this is it's actually right between the last section of their thorax and the first 2 abdominal segments. It's called a timbal, and it is when it's expanded and contracted, getting bigger and smaller, you know, it produces a click, and it's a pretty obnoxious and loud click, and it's almost like taking a plastic water bottle that is still capped, but it's kind of crushed, and just go ahead and just squeezing it all crazy and everything, and that can get pretty noisy. And elsewhere, I'll share with you a link to some cicada noises, and you'll see why they can be so obnoxious. Now, there are some pretty cool ears. These would be analogous structures to our own ears in that they're not actually ears, like on the side of the head, but they are functional ears, and it's called a tympanum. That's the name of basically a drum or a membrane, like an eardrum. And these are on the front legs of members of the order Orthoptera, which is the crickets and grasshoppers. And so that's how they can hear those chirps of other crickets and grasshoppers. Well, I hope I don't get in trouble for using this picture. This bird is just absolutely fantastic. You may recognize it from the Disney movie A Bug's Life. And the reason why I wanted to bring that up is that there are risks to being a noisy, obnoxious male looking for females. So you may have some insect that's like chirpity chirp 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 going nuts and all that good stuff. And not only is he attracting females, but there are predators and parasites who are also going to key in on that. And so there may be a greater chance at finding a mate. However, there's also a greater risk at getting killed or eaten or parasites and all that good stuff. There was actually a recent study where somebody was researching noisy crickets, some species that would chirp at night and make a lot of noise, and they found that there were quiet crickets as well that would hang around the noisy crickets. And the noisy crickets are sitting there going chirpity chirp chirp chirp, chirpy chirp, and all that good stuff, making all this noise and locating mates and finding a potential mate. And then these quiet male crickets who were hanging around, once a female was found, those quiet, mellow, kind of reserved crickets that didn't waste all their energy on making noise actually wound up jumping in and mating with the female cricket. And so there may be a benefit to those males because they are not expending all that energy on making noise and risking their lives. So that was kind of an interesting study that came out on crickets. But anyway, kind of a downside to being obnoxious and noisy. There are also some structures that are used or come into play once a mate is located. And androconia are these structures on the wings that actually produce smells and attract the females. These little things called scent pencils. And these are structures that what eversible means is that under blood pressure, they will sort of inflate and produce these scents. And aphrodisiacs are chemicals that are released that kind of enhances that bond and reinforces that bond between the two mating individuals. And so those come into play not when trying to find a mate, but when a mate has actually been located. There are some other pheromones that are released once mating is occurring, and some of those would be what's considered anti-male pheromones, and those effectively shut down the interest of other nearby males, so they will not be interested in mating, and it prevents accidental matings with other males. And there are even anti-species pheromones, and these are pheromones that are released that go, uh-oh, whoops, wrong species, let's not continue with this, because that would actually be a waste of energy invested by both of those species, and the DNA doesn't match, and so they're not going to produce any viable offspring. So it's kind of a good check to make sure you're mating with the correct species. So there are some structures that can also be used to prevent the female from mating again after mating. Basically, those are spermatophores and mating plugs. And also anti-aphrodisiacs are basically those chemicals that will kind of turn off any interested males. But the mating plugs and spermatophores will actually plug the female reproductive tract, and so she cannot mate or accept any other combination of DNA from any other male to fertilize her eggs. In terms of sperm longevity, what's kind of interesting is there, in terms of the range of quote lifespans of sperm, the sperm in bedbugs is pretty short-lived, and so bedbugs have to mate rather regularly to have cute little kids. but there are queen ants that are at the other end of the spectrum, and they can actually mate once, and the sperm that they receive in their reproductive tract can last for many years, and they don't have to mate again. So there is a pretty wide range of longevity of sperm when it comes to insects mating. Okay, there's one other phenomenon I wanted to continue, and we're getting ready to wrap up this video as well, is a phenomenon called sperm precedence. And this is where actually it's either the sperm that's transferred by the last male or the first male is used for fertilization. Sometimes the last sperm, in the case of multiple matings, the last sperm that is provided by the male actually dislodges any previous sperm from any previous matings with other males. And what's kind of interesting, actually, I didn't really anticipate talking about bats, but I remember there was a study years ago that showed that in some species of bat that was studied, the females actually had multiple male partners, and when the scientists did DNA tests on the little baby bats that were born, they found that all the baby bats only had one father, and it was consistently the same father, even though the female had multiple matings. And so somehow biologically, or somehow her body could make a decision on what sperm is used to fertilize her eggs and have cute little baby bats. And from the multiple males' perspective, they all thought that they were the fathers. And so that was just kind of an interesting finding in that research, is that the female's body can actually pick the actual father for her kids, despite multiple matings and sperm from different sources, different competing males. Okay, 2 slides to go. Thanks for hanging in there. We are almost done with this thing. Here is an example of sperm competition driving evolution here, and Odonata, of course, are the dragonflies and damselflies, and on the male they have some little bits to their private parts that actually scoop out the sperm from inside of a female, and so there's so much competition that the males are actually they have evolved structures that remove sperm of other males from previous matings. And so, and I actually remember seeing a story a couple of years ago where they found that some female dragonflies will actually play dead just to get away from these males that are trying to mate with her. And I don't know what species that was or anything, but yeah, pretty interesting research there too. But just to think that there are anatomical structures, of course, that have evolved to physically remove sperm from the female is kind of a trip. Okay, welcome to the last slide, and thanks for hanging in there, you guys. This is the last part that I wanted to cover in this chunk of the chapter on insect behavior, and specifically locating mates and copulation. And the thing with the spermatophores is it's not just a sperm packet, but there are also nutrients and materials that go to benefit the health of the female, of the mother. So it's not just DNA that's being provided, but there's a lot more that's going to keep her alive and ensure the survivability of their offspring. And the greatest sort of a pretty significant extreme here is that these long-horned grasshoppers that are also known as katydids, when they mate, the males actually transfer about a third of their body mass. So it's way more than just a cute little sperm packet. And this is actually going to really help the female survival and, of course, the survival of the offspring. They'll get the best start there. So it is quite a sacrifice, but it's, you know, pretty something else that the male can provide for his offspring and for her offspring and all that stuff. So, all right, sounds fair enough. I think we will wrap this one up. So, and we'll move on.